RuneScape and Dark Souls are these two kind of mythical games that people seem to play at the right time in their lives. There are a lot of people on YouTube talking about how Dark Souls changed them, and others about how RuneScape is a game that stood the test of time and that they still play to this day. I'm both of those people, and I want to talk about why these two games are similar and what they've taught me over the years. Greetings everyone, I'm glad to see you here. Get comfortable, grab a snack and a drink, and let's get into it. I have a long history with Dark Souls 1 and RuneScape. I vividly remember going to GameStop with my mom when I was about 10 looking for a cheap used game, a tradition in our house. Somehow, someway, the GameStop worker convinced me and my mom that Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition was the perfect game for little old me. Looking back, that dude was either trying to open my eyes to one of the best games ever made, or was an evil lunatic that wanted to torture me with one of the most difficult ones. I remember beating the Asylum Demon and making it to Firelink, so I don't think I was quite as stupid as I thought I was back then, but I also remember getting really pissed off at some of the early areas, thinking it was just too hard and was complete bullshit. I don't know when I gave up, but I did. I returned to GameStop with my mom a few days later and refunded Dark Souls. At the same time, I was getting into RuneScape. This was around the 2010 to 2013 era when the website and loading screens looked like this. It was a snowy Christmas. My mom's side of the family was in town and we were all staying at my grandma's out in the country. My two older cousins had brought their laptops and were playing this game called RuneScape. I had played a little bit of Club Penguin in my day, so I was kind of familiar with the concept of an MMO, but RuneScape was cool and older and kind of badass. Something about it just really excited me, and I downloaded it shortly after. I remember playing on and off over the next few years, across several characters, and I definitely didn't make any meaningful progress across any of them. I mostly just walked around Lumbridge and Varrock, exploring and gawking at the other players with cool weapons and armor. At some point, I think around the 2014 era, RuneScape had changed, and I just stopped and didn't return. Now let's fast forward to September of 2018. I'm in high school, have an insatiable libido, and my friend won't shut up about Dark Souls. Dude, you gotta get Dark Souls. Hurry up and get Dark Souls so I can enroll you in PvP. I think everyone ever that's played Dark Souls did so begrudgingly because of their annoying friend that just wouldn't shut the hell up about it. I eventually caved and bought Dark Souls Remastered on Steam, and my friend walked me through the opening hours. He taught me how to get the Drake Sword, told me to kill the Undead Merchant, and showed me the Taurus Demon drop attack. At some point, probably the Capra Demon, I threw my hands up and gave in for a second time. About 2 months later, I catch wind of old school, what the hell, RuneScape on mobile. The fact that it was free is probably the only reason they even considered playing with me, and play we did over that Thanksgiving break. Ah, the memories. Lining up in Varrock Square and timing our emotes so that we'd all spin at the same time. Wandering into Draenor Manor and getting bodied by Dracula. Randomly being gifted 10,000 gold by a guy in lizard armor. It was one of the times of all time, and we had fun wandering around together. After Thanksgiving break, we never really played as a group again. RuneScape is admittedly a pretty hard game to get new people into. Even though my friends weren't returning to the game, I certainly was, and thus, my yearly on and off relationship with RuneScape was reignited. Now finally to November of 2020. Just like literally everyone, I was sad and lonely. COVID was pretty much in full swing, online school had just started and I fucking hated it, and I was really just looking for something to do. My life at the time was just wake up, get on the computer, and listen to a bunch of idiots talk to me through a screen. Some things never change. I don't know why, but I just randomly decided to reinstall Dark Souls and give it another shot. I knew about the legendary status it held and that it was indeed a difficult game through and through. So I told myself I'd try to beat it once and for all. I created my character and set out to conquer this game. What followed was 2 weeks of pure dedication to Dark Souls. I wasn't prepared for just how different it was compared to every other game I had played. I was actually waking up early so that I could get a few hours in before the day officially started. At 10 a.m., of course. Playing Dark Souls for the first time is like a religious experience, especially if it finds you at the right time in your life. I was facing problems like whether or not I wanted to go to college, what I was going to do with my life, and if the world would be able to heal from all of the turmoil that had gone on throughout 2020. It was a weird, dark time, and I was angry and confused, but Dark Souls showed me the light and gave me some kind of meaning. I had to ring the bells of awakening. I needed to reinstate the Age of Fire. The beautiful thing about this game is that you kind of do everything of your own volition. Dark Souls is pretty vague. There aren't any quest markers, no written objectives, just borderline incoherent ramblings here and there from a handful of NPCs.
Greetings. I am Oswald of Karim, the partner. Thou art a friend. For thee, a warm welcome. Cometh thou to confess, or to accuse? For indeed all sin is my domain. Thou art welcome any time. It is only human to commit a sin.
Its storytelling is obtuse and unconventional, but that's why I love it. Nobody is holding your hand, telling you exactly what you need to do, and then showering you with praise, rewards, and exposition. It simply just is what you make of it. I know this sentiment has been echoed by basically everyone that's played Dark Souls, but I identified with the Chosen Undead, and felt like my journey through Lordran paralleled my life on Earth. The main character of my own story, and a hostile world that's completely indifferent to my achievements. Is the Chosen Undead the newest Literally Me character? My favorite metaphor in Dark Souls, and one that sticks with me to this day, is the corpses scattered across the game. In a literal sense, all you do is loot them and they give you some currency. But in a metaphoric sense, they're other people, other players that went hollow. They gave up on Dark Souls and never came back. All that remains is their abandoned characters, empty husks, nameless and forgotten. The kind of souls that these corpses drop change as you progress throughout the game. In the beginning areas, which are by most metrics the least difficult, they're almost pathetic sounding. These are the players that left before the game was able to hit its stride, the ones that folded from the easiest of challenges. They achieved nothing of note, left no impact on the world, and as a result, are completely insignificant. The character I made when I was 10 is one of these corpses. But as you progress through Dark Souls, the titles are less sad and start to convey more meaning. These are players that defeated tough challenges, overcame adversity, but still fell and weren't able to finish the game for one reason or another. I love this metaphor because it symbolizes humanity's shared struggle and how we can help each other on our own paths, even if unintentionally. The great hero didn't mean to die right here, but because he did, he can help me carry on just a little further. It's like a ladder to the top. All of these fallen players are a rung. Eventually, the ladder will be complete and there will be someone strong enough to climb to the top. Those are the players that beat Dark Souls. In case you think I'm looking too far into this, the game even seems to hint at the idea of parallel universes and overlapping realities.
Oh, aha. So I didn't scare you. I have a proposition, if you have a moment. The way I see it, our fates appear to be intertwined. In a land brimming with hollows, could that really be mere chance? So what do you say? Why not help one another on this lonely journey? This pleases me greatly. Well then, take this. We are amidst strange beings in a strange land. The flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes centuries old phasing in and out. The very fabric wavers, and relations shift and obscure. There's no telling how much longer your world and mine will remain in contact. But use this to summon one another as spirits, cross the gaps between the worlds, and engage in jolly cooperation. Of course, we are not the only ones engaged in this, but I am a warrior of the sun. Spot my summon signature easily by its brilliant aura. If you miss it, you must be blind.
Whenever I'm working on personal projects, whether it be writing, drawing, or animation, and I feel like stopping, I think about how much more I could achieve if I just carried on a little longer. Where someone else might have given up, I'll keep going. And if I go hollow, someone else will be able to pick up where I left off. In RuneScape, this same metaphor can be applied to some extent. RuneScape in particular is a game largely shaped by its community, unlike other MMOs. Players can vote on what updates they get, and there's generally a pretty good relationship between Jagex and the player base. You can feel the threads of previous generations that enjoyed this game, but it's an odd feeling. You know there are players that contributed to this history that are just gone. That's where one comparison between RuneScape and Dark Souls can be made. There's an emotional overlap, something kind of existential about the way they make you feel about your own playthrough compared to others. In Dark Souls, the existence of other players and their characters are hinted at through dialogue and items, and it's strongly implied that you're insignificant in the grand scheme of things, which we'll come back to later. It's woven into the story and is intentional on the developer's part, but in RuneScape, I get that same feeling, even though it's not intentional at all. For me, when I play these MMOs that have been around for decades at this point, I can't help but wonder what kind of people have passed through them. Where are they now, and what kind of impact did they leave on the game I'm currently enjoying? Just like the fallen heroes of Dark Souls, there are of course players like the Old Knight and Sir Tony Ray that have unfortunately passed away in real life. Thinking about big existential stuff like this can be sad, but I think there's a silver lining to be found. Although these players have passed on in the real world, their impact can still be felt in the game, even if you don't know it. Now I want to talk about the physical worlds of these two games. If you look at them and compare their vertical and horizontal dimensions, they're pretty different, and both mean something unique to me. In Dark Souls, the world is almost completely vertical. For the large majority of the game, you're either going up or you're going down. The meaning of this is obvious. If you look at your playthrough of Dark Souls and compare it to real life, this verticality can represent the highs and lows you'll naturally experience as life goes on. You start off roughly in the middle. I'd argue that Firelink is the most comfortable area in all of Dark Souls 1. There are friendly NPCs here that will help you, and it serves as a jumping off point for your journey ahead. I like to think of Firelink as Mom and Dad's house. After braving the Undead Burg and Undead Parish, one of the most euphoric moments in the game is taking a random elevator down and realizing you've been dropped off back at Firelink. It's comforting and feels like returning home after trudging through adult life. Another thing about Firelink that I find significant is the two main paths you're presented with taking at the start. You can go up into the Undead Burg or down into the New Londo ruins. Going down is significantly harder than going up because of the overwhelmingly difficult enemies. You'd really only do so to grab a specific item or two, basically making it the wrong path for new players. Although going down might be a mistake, it's one that pretty much every player makes their first time. The thing is, this mistake is what separates the two kinds of Dark Souls players. There are those that stubbornly fight these rolling skeletons, thinking to themselves, this is right next to the starter area, surely I need to be here. They're under-equipped, under-leveled, and under-experienced, and yet they'll die and die over and over again, not learning from their mistakes and blindly attacking the enemy with little forethought. A lot of players that do this give up on Dark Souls and write it off as too difficult. Something very similar to this can be seen in Elden Ring with the Tree Sentinel, which is the first enemy you see in the open world and is way too difficult for 99% of new players. The other kind of player might start on the downward path, but after realizing their mistake will look elsewhere and realize that going up is in their best interest. Enemies in the Undead Burg are a lot more manageable, and that path is a much more gradual incline in difficulty compared to the New Londo ruins. Throughout the rest of Dark Souls, you'll achieve early highs, only to be soon followed by unfathomable lows. The point is made even more brilliantly because there's no fast travel for the first half of Dark Souls. Everywhere you go is on foot, meaning that when you find yourself in Blight Town or the Depths, the only way out is to walk back up. And these aren't short walks either. Most of Dark Souls' early game feels more like bumbling around the mines of Moria than the Battle of Helm's Deep. This is much like how we view our own lives compared to reality. Oftentimes we can see ourselves through a heroic lens, thinking of ourselves as the main character that does no wrong, but in truth, human life is usually boring and slow, with few heroics. Dark Souls takes those expectations you might have of being a triumphant hero and flips them on their heads, much like life usually does. To me, the world and the player's journey throughout it can be seen as a microcosm of the human experience. Impossibly low lows, followed by increasingly high highs, and vice versa. It's a game that contrasts despair and loneliness with achievement and grandeur better than any other I've ever played, and it's not because anyone told me to think that or spelled it out for me. I didn't play Dark Souls with a guide, I didn't watch explanation videos, these were my genuine emotions while playing, and that's special. RuneScape, on the other hand, is big in a different way. Whereas Dark Souls is deep, RuneScape is wide. I might be reaching a bit more with my analysis of RuneScape, but to me, Gielinor represents a human's want to explore distant horizons. It can be seen as less of an emotional metaphor and more of an innately creative one. If you're playing RuneScape for the first time and don't know where to go or what to expect, the only reason you'd explore beyond the Black Void and venture farther out is for the inherent want to discover new things. This is something that I think RuneScape does incredibly well. The world was crafted in such a way that it feels like every nook and cranny, every tile, has something important that you don't want to miss. It facilitates creativity and usually rewards players for talking to random NPCs or interacting with unassuming objects. Other open world games often feel empty and lifeless, but not intentionally like Dark Souls. In the case of other MMOs, they too often feel like wide expanses of nothing, sometimes not even other players. More than a few times, I've been playing an MMO like WoW, running for minutes at a time without another soul in sight. In single-player games like Cyberpunk and GTA 5, the worlds are technically populated, but they feel lifeless. There's little substance to the activities and characters that inhabit them. They're really just set dressing, and if you try to interact with them beyond a surface level, you get nothing. The immersion is broken. I guess it's just crazy to me that a game like RuneScape, which looks archaic by today's standards, feels more vibrant and lively than most other games from any genre. You'll see high-level players running around Lumbridge with all the newbies, and vice versa in late-game areas. Going back to WoW, it's like everyone is at the endgame, and if you're just starting out, it's a desolate, lonely race to catch up. The experience of exploring the worlds of Dark Souls and RuneScape is wholly unique to both of them, respectively, and neither have been topped for me, except by maybe Red Dead 2. With that said, I'm ready to move on to the final chapter of this video. The last comparison I want to make between these two games is that you're just not that guy. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, let's look at RuneScape first. Other MMOs will grant you titles, status, and other stuff as you play that makes you specifically feel like some kind of big important person in the lore. These games will often make you part of canon events, which can be cool sometimes, but me personally, I don't want that. In RuneScape, you definitely do things that are significant through questing, but at the end of the day, I've always kind of just felt like a normal guy. Compared to other games of the same ilk, RuneScape feels a lot more like a bunch of random, mid-level adventurers inhabiting the same world. I think a large part of why it feels like that is because of how many regular, non-combative skills there are for you to level. And these skills aren't shoved to the side or second to combat, which is how most other MMOs seem to do it. No, some of the more relaxed skills like cooking, woodcutting, and fishing are the entire game for a lot of people. Hell, I'm one of them. And these skills facilitate a healthy player base. Someone that focuses on crafting can sell their product to someone that needs it for combat. I really like just logging in to do some forestry or fishing with a group of random players. And it adds to that feeling of being just another person on their RuneScape journey. The social element is alive and well in OSRS, so you're naturally seeing a lot more players running around doing their own thing, which also adds to my point. It's like every game is adopting this never-ending skill ceiling that every player is climbing over themselves to get to. Min-maxing armor, grinding for loot, optimizing every single part of the game just so that you can be a fraction of a percent better than everyone else. I mean, honestly, is it even fun at that point? And I know, RuneScape is a game that people have optimized, and that's how they play. But they're a small fraction of the community, not the entirety of it. I guess it's just nice that RuneScape, which doesn't have the hallmarks of other MMOs, is beating out pretty much all of the competition and is currently in its golden age. I feel lucky to have a game like this where I can just play a standard role in a large fantasy world. I never feel bound to some class or ongoing storyline. I can really just do whatever I want, whether it be cooking pies or slaying demons. And that's beautiful. Similarly to OSRS, you're not that guy in Dark Souls either. I know that my points on this topic for RuneScape were more of a personal testimony that some people might not agree with, but I get the same just another guy trying to be great feeling in Dark Souls that I get from RuneScape. I'll give you this. In RuneScape, there are definitely things to achieve that will make you feel like more of a badass hero than everyone else. While I'd argue those achievements aren't necessarily the main point of the game, it's more about the journey, Dark Souls is pretty undeniably not very heroic, and I have solid evidence to prove it. In Dark Souls, you of course play as the Chosen Undead, a prophesized character that will ring the bells of awakening and reinstate the Age of Fire. Sounds pretty heroic so far, right? Well, after escaping the Undead Asylum, you find out that you aren't the first and probably won't be the last to embark on this journey.
Well, what do we have here? You must be a new arrival. Let me guess, fate of the undead, right? Well, you're not the first, but there's no salvation here. You'd have done better to rot in the undead asylum. But too late now. Well, since you're here, let me help you out. There are, actually, 2 bells of awakening. One's up above in the undead church. The other is far, far below, in the ruins at the base of Blight Town. Ring them both, and something happens. Brilliant, right? Not much to go on, but I have a feeling that won't stop you. So, off you go. It is why you came, isn't it? To this accursed land of the undead?
Plenty of undead have escaped the Undead Asylum before you, and most of the road ahead has already been paved by previous adventurers that failed somewhere along the way. This is what we talked about earlier with all of the corpses spread throughout the game. As you progress towards the end, you naturally achieve more by slaying bosses, ringing the bells of awakening, etc. Now, on the point of feeling like just another person in a world full of other realized characters, the NPCs in Dark Souls feel especially lived in to me. Their dialogue and voice acting is appropriate for the world that they live in. They never exposition dump or talk to you like the main character, if you know what I mean.
You leave me no choice.
I also love how they move around the world. This is something that I think Dark Souls 3 was sorely missing. In DS1, NPCs have their own journeys to go on, and as you progress throughout your adventure, so too will they on theirs. Oftentimes, games like this will have an NPC just sit in the same spot to sell you things or teach you something. They feel stagnant and like they don't have anything going on in their lives. In Dark Souls, after certain events happen, NPCs will move around and sometimes even die or go missing outright. I'm a big fan of that, and it was really cool to bump into some of these characters in a spot that I wasn't expecting them to be in. Anyway, after ringing the second bell of awakening, you're approached by Frampt. You've got some achievements under your belt and you've awoken a Kingseeker. Frampt basically tells you what the rest of your journey is going to look like so that you can beat the game. You embark on the rest of your quest, slaying foe after foe, and are faced with the final challenge. You've overcome so much and enter the kiln of the First Flame, battling the final few knights that stand in your way. You reach the final arena, ready to do battle with the legendary Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. This moment is possibly the most iconic in the entire Dark Souls series. Everyone remembers their first time going into this fight, expecting triumphant orchestral music and a battle with the Lord of Cinder, a figure that's been talked up throughout the entire game, only to be met with this. It's sad. Gwyn, the final boss of this game, is one of the easiest. He can be parried, has highly telegraphed attacks, and looks like a husk of a man. Is this really the same person that we saw throwing lightning bolts at dragons in the opening cutscene? So much time has passed, the fire has nearly faded, and Gwyn is a mere husk of his former self. We're almost doing him a favor by ending his suffering and taking his place. Assuming you followed Frampt's storyline, all that's left to do is reignite the flame, ushering in another age of fire. All we did was buy the world a little more time. We know that someday, we'll meet the same fate as Gwyn. It's more tragic than anything else, but it's a perfect ending to this game. You're then met with the credits, and this song. I remember just sitting there, listening to this. It's very somber and leaves you with a pit in your stomach. Dark Souls was a journey that you went on. You overcame every challenge, did everything right, but now it's over. Dark Souls is one of those games that you wish you could go back and experience with fresh eyes. Everyone remembers their first playthrough fondly, and this song seems to almost acknowledge that in a strange way. It's like it's telling you, this was a good time, but it's over now, which perfectly echoes the entire point of Dark Souls. The end of an era. You get the other ending of Dark Souls when you decide to listen to Koth instead of Frampt. Koth states,
"You are astonishing. The truth I shall share, without sentiment. After the advent of fire, the ancient lords found the 3 souls, but your progenitor found a 4th, unique soul, the Dark Soul. Your ancestor claimed the Dark Soul and waited for fire to subside, and soon the flames did fade, and only dark remained. Thus began the Age of Men, the Age of Dark. However, Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark, clinging to his Age of Fire and in dire fear of humans and the Dark Lord who would one day be born amongst them. Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature by sacrificing himself to link the fire and commanding his children to shepherd the humans. Gwyn has blurred your past to prevent the birth of the Dark Lord."
Upon defeating Gwyn, you can choose to become the Dark Lord, ending the Age of Fire and ushering in the Age of Man. There are so many different ways to interpret this, but I want to leave that to you. Both endings feel temporary, like this is nowhere near the end of the story, but rather just a cliff note. I know what these endings symbolize to me, but rather than try to explain it away to you, I'll leave it up to your own interpretation. Thank you everyone for stopping in and listening to me talk about these two beautiful games. If you'd like to help me make more videos in the future, consider subscribing to my Patreon and liking this video. As always, it was good to see you, and farewell for now.